Meeting overshadowed. The Trump cabinet gathers to enthusiastically discuss DOGE cuts. Yes, Elon Musk had a seat at the table. But it is the revelation that top national security officials within the Trump administration shared messages on Signal about Yemen war plans with a journalist mistakenly looking on that's gathering so much attention today. Also, deportation fight. New flights land in Venezuela as the legal battle continues with a federal judge over earlier flights to El Salvador. It all revolves around the administration's use of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act in its push to quickly deport alleged Venezuelan gang members, doing so without due process. Attorney General Pam Bondi says this case could and should go all the way to the Supreme Court.
This is an out-of-control judge, a federal judge trying to control our entire foreign policy, and he cannot do it.
Also, seeing red in Greenland, the Prime Minister of the Danish territory slams what he calls a, quote, highly aggressive, unquote, visit by U.S. officials. In that delegation, Second Lady Usha Vance and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. President Trump, as you well know, has repeatedly expressed interest in acquiring Greenland. We don't know exactly how. Anyway, we start tonight with Robert Costa and James LaPorta. Robert, great to have you with us. Big cabinet meeting to extol DOGE cuts to the federal workforce and efficiencies with Elon Musk right there. And I say this all the time, this is not a stock market show, but the market up today, Tesla stock up today. That's all part of the context around this.
And you see Elon Musk continuing to gain traction inside of President Trump's administration. He is a confidant of the president, not just some special governmental advisor. And despite some of the cabinet members privately having their own grumbles about Musk's power, Musk is retaining that power.
James, I want to talk to you about this story that is, I think, justifiably rocking Washington today and all those in the national security intelligence community circle.
Right.
The Atlantic magazine, under Jeff Goldberg's byline, published a story saying that he was inadvertently included on what can only be described as a text chain on Signal, which is a non-secure commercial app. It has some security, some encryption, but it's commercial. It's not security. It's certainly not considered something by the U.S. government suitable for any unclassified and certainly not top secret or classified information. He was inadvertently included in a text chain of all these senior Trump administration national security officials before the raids began in Yemen, describing all of the policy implications thereof. Walk us through this crazy story.
You said it right. My phone has been blowing up all day from people who are active duty U.S. military and active in the U.S. intelligence community. It violates pretty much every protocol that they're taught to go into those roles. Yes. I mean, if you look at just unclassified information, not talking about secret or top secret information, unclassified information, the Defense Department specifically is barred from using third-party apps like Signal, like Telegram. They're not allowed to use even those apps to pass unclassified information. In fact, their memo says, quote, the misuse and mismanagement of mobile apps poses a cybersecurity and operation security risk. Now, that's just unclassified information. When you're talking about Yemen war plans, when you're talking about targets, Houthi targets, you're talking about secret and top secret information. So it really is mind-blowing to every military and intelligence community professional.
And James, in your experience, you know of situations in which junior grade, either enlisted men or junior officers, did something far less worse and got the book thrown.
They've been court-martialed for less. I know of a sailor who took pictures on a submarine, and those pictures he was trying to send to his family. He was reprimanded for that, and I believe was sent to court-martial. I know of another court-martial of a major who he sent a warning to Afghanistan, but he sent classified information over his Gmail account versus his SIPR account, his secret email account that he was supposed to use, and he was reprimanded. And I'm not sure if that went to court-martial, but again, lesser instances of what we're seeing here today.
Robert, I want to read to you a statement that came from the National Security Council, because if you read the story, which I urge everyone to do, Jeff Goldberg says for the longest time he thought this was some sort of either disinformation or entrapment, like this wasn't real, and they were trying to get him to say or communicate things that would be embarrassing to him as a reporter. NSC says this: at this time, the messages thread that was reported appears to be authentic. and we are reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain. That's a confession that happened. This is real. And what Jeff Goldberg saw, conversations between the vice president, national security advisor, secretary of state, and others, or their designees, was legit and visible through a reporter when it never should have been.
At this point, it's all up to President Trump in terms of how this is going to proceed. Because Republicans control the House and control the Senate, there seems to be at this moment, this early hour at least in this story, no sincere interest from Republicans on Capitol Hill to start mounting a formal investigation, though you have seen some exasperation in at least the initial flurry of comments from some Republicans. But if President Trump decides to drive this forward and perhaps dismiss somebody involved in this entire exchange, whether it's a staffer or even a principal, the story will have legs, and it could have legs as an investigation. But at this point, President Trump has so much executive power, and he seems to be, based on my latest round of calls, standing by those involved.
And Robert, from a purely political perspective, there was lots of dialogue during the 23 and 2024 years about classified documents, the handling thereof, the sensitivity around that. Lots of Republicans are on the record saying you got to be careful.
That's true. President Biden's records got scrutiny. Of course, President Trump's records got scrutiny and were under federal investigation.
But his defense was, I was president, and under the Presidential Records Act, I had a kind of immunity. That doesn't exist for any of these other people.
And this report by Jeff Goldberg in The Atlantic raises further questions about, is Signal, this encrypted messaging application, something that's used for other conversations within the administration that are not necessarily going to be documented? Presidential records and you would guess those in the cabinet, at least to a certain extent, are supposed to be properly documented outside of messaging apps. And this has been an issue going back not just to 2020, but to 2016, when Secretary Clinton's use of a private email server became a political issue in the final months of that campaign. This is going to be a lingering problem for national security officials in the coming years. Secure apps, as Jim knows, these are such a prevalent thing in the intelligence community. But just how far should these top officials go? That's a real question.
Right.
Please.
Well, what I was going to say is this comes in the wake, this report out today comes in the wake of just last week and just this month of the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, of the Pentagon saying, if we find that you're talking to journalists, if we think that you're leaking, we're going to polygraph you. We're going to investigate you. And, you know, I heard from people today that that's almost laughable at this point, because of what they were doing. And so, but this comes at a time when professionals in the Defense Department, professionals in the intelligence community are on notice from their own government saying, if we find that you're talking to journalists, if we suspect you of leaking, you're going to be polygraphed. And when when professionals are suspected of perhaps leaking something that is something the administration might not like.
So in that case, if someone was polygraphed and prosecuted, they might reasonably point to this and say, wait a minute, what are you doing with me?
Right.
How about that over there? This is selective prosecution. At minimum, that could be an argument they could put on their behalf.
It's definitely a defense, yes.
That's right. James LaPorta, Robert Costa, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great way to start us off. I appreciate it. Scott MacFarlane joins me now. Scott, it was a busy day in the federal courthouse today. Catch us up on the deportation, the flights, the underlying legal issues, and how it all got sorted out, if you can.
Yeah, the president's first 2 months has turned into this legal thriller that has chapter after chapter, like a episodic podcast. Today was the appeals court in Washington, D.C., taking a look at the Trump administration's request to resume these Alien Enemies Act deportations. They want to open up that pipeline again to expedite the removal of foreign nationals without having to go through the trouble of having a court make sure there aren't any mistakes being made and people being scooped up that shouldn't be. There was immediate skepticism, Major, from some of the appellate judges in the District of Columbia, one of whom says it appears, based on what she saw from the March 15th deportation of the Venezuelan nationals, that even the Nazis were treated better, that they had more of an opportunity to review their cases before being sent out of the country. That gives you an indication, Major, of the skepticism that exists, not just with the district court judge here, James Boasberg, but over his head at the appellate court.
And Scott, has it become evident that some of the people who were sent to El Salvador should not have been sent there, do not qualify under the Enemy Aliens Act, or are gang members of this Venezuelan prison gang?
That's what the plaintiffs' attorneys have flagged for the court, those who've represented some number of Venezuelan nationals who say this Alien Enemies Act is being misused and improperly used at this moment, that there are people who are among those at risk of deportation or who have been deported who shouldn't have been. that errors were made. And that's where the judge has come down on this so far. The judge who put a pause on this, or tried to put a pause on this, he has said in open court declaratively, how do we know mistakes aren't being made? You can still keep these individuals locked up on U.S. soil. You can still deport them through the traditional means, but using this 18th century law that's only used during wartime leaves you vulnerable for mistakes. And that's where the appeals court picked up today, Major. This all feels like it's on a fast track to the Supreme Court, where we expect these types of arguments will be made in extended form.
And Scott, if I understand the arguments, it's not that no one is saying you can't deport people who have committed crimes in this country, who've entered this country illegally. But if you use this particular law, 1798 law, and you use it so rashly, due process rights are implicated. Future applications of that law could be equally reckless, equally rash, and that could impinge much more dramatically on many other people's civil rights.
Really two different arguments there, Major. That's one of them, that there's a slippery slope here. How do we know the next person that's deemed a foreign national isn't actually a U.S. citizen and sent to a foreign prison without due process? That's a concern. But also, the judge Friday in district court, Major, James Boasberg, pushed back, I think, on the criticism Trump was giving him, that he just wants to free these people. Judge Boasberg said specifically, I'm not saying you can have to release these people. You can keep them locked up and use the traditional means. The criticism of the judge continues in Republican circles among Trump's allies. And if the appeals court goes the wrong way, let's see if the criticism shifts there as well.
Scott MacFarlane, as always, thank you, sir.